Looking for my
Okay,
agenda.
9:03, and you can begin your meeting.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome back to the Board of Ed, and back from our summer vacations and ready for a year of productivity. We have got a lot on our agenda today, and as far as not a tremendous number of policies, but a lot of, I think it's 107 pages of policy to discuss. So before we do all of that, gosh, it's been a long time. Let's see. I don't have my agenda in front of me because I'm having a difficult time pulling that up right now, but I think we start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Is that right? Or do we call the meeting to order first?
Call your meeting to order, and then you can go right into your business.
Okay, excellent. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Let's see. I've got to find that agenda. So calling the meeting to order, and then let's go ahead and start with our first item on the agenda, which is policy number. Do you have anybody have a policy number for me there?
5131.911.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, let's just dive right in. We got a lot.
So, yes, welcome back. Policies are important. We were actually talking about this policy yesterday. So I had sent it out so you could see it a little bit earlier. It's, it's very dense policy. I think that the most important thing is that these policy changes are rooted in state statute, and they are things that we have to do. And to just say that it is for the better, it aligns with, quite frankly, what I would say is a refreshing approach to the whole issue of school climate, bullying, and how we can better align practices and policies with, how we want to operate safe schools in general. What was interesting was, we started the year, and there's a theme, and we're going to talk about this a little bit at the board retreat. There's been a theme that we have been looking at, starting with our kickoff convocation speaker, Dr. Joanne Freiberg. Dr. Freiberg used to be the person 20 years ago when I was a middle school principal. We would get a call about, there would be a bullying incident, and she was the bullying, help me out guys, what was she? Sort of like the bullying consultant for the state, or if parents had a concern about bullying, they would call her. And as middle school principal, I remember talking to Joanne a lot because things happen often in middle schools with all the changes of the children going from age 10 to 14. And she came and she was a kickoff speaker this year. Dr. Henkel and Miss Canetta at the high school were really kind of instrumental in getting her. And she came and she was going through the Connecticut school climate standards and how they were modeled from the national school climate standards. But it's a much more, I would say, proactive approach. And we have been taking these standards apart, looking at our data in our surveys, and really trying to build sort of taking the whole Positive School Climate Initiative, what I like to say, to another level. And so these policies reflect that, because if you see with the bullying prevention, it's the same number. They just have replaced it with a different title, and what I would say a different, more proactive approach. There's also a restorative practice theme through the policies. So this is important that we move these forward this year. I believe the districts have until next year to fully implement them. Is that correct, Tracy? I think so.
July 1st, 25.
July 1st, but we want to get ahead of it, clearly, because a lot of what we have been doing around this work aligns with it. So I would ask my colleagues that are on the call, Ms. Edwards, and I see Dr. Henkel in the background, want to add anything to sort of the differences in the approach with these policies.
So I don't know if everyone had a chance to review it yet, but I think one of the key changes is how we're defining many of these concepts and ideas, including the concept of bullying in general. I think people should look over the definition. I'm not going to read through them. I don't think that's a productive use of time. But understanding that there is a new definition for bullying, there are lots of other terms defined on those initial pages, including Lisa was just speaking about the concept of restorative practices, which I think is something conceptually that we've valued as a district, but now we're more focused on the specificity of that approach and how we'll be applying that, especially within the context of this particular policy. I think there's some interest at the building levels in adopting this policy sooner rather than later, which is part of the reason that it's coming to you today. You'll notice that the forms at the end of the policy, and I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but they are much more streamlined, I would say, and more user-friendly for all stakeholders, be it students, parents, and administrators. So I think those are kind of the high-level highlights. There's lots of discussion here around school climate plans and roles that the building administrators and I play in that process, and also a school climate survey, which is something that's already been in place in the district, although we'll be implementing a revised version of that during this school year.
Teresa Taylor.
What was last year? Was last year the first year that we had this policy that was, I guess, implemented somewhat and disseminated to people? And then we had the climate survey, I think, last year. Was that the first year? And the reason why I ask is because when I took a look at the document, it looked like the revision to some of those forms, I guess there were earlier versions of those forms back in 2010, 2011, and then there was a revision in 2023. So was last year the first year that we took a crack at this, laying out what this plan would be, sort of getting ready for the mandatory requirement that is 2025? Is that right? Was last year the first year?
So I think we brought a revised policy. I'd have to go back and check my notes to the board the year before last. And actually, to be honest, that policy had undergone revision at the state level a few years prior, but we were in the process of kind of catching up on policy revisions that needed to happen. And there was a bullying policy in place prior to that. Each policy, I will just point out, has had a different definition of bullying. So there's been a lot of evolution in this. We did not roll out the last updated policy because of this one. This is a new iteration from the state. And like I said, I think there are some good changes here. The school climate survey we've administered for the last 2 years. This will be our third consecutive year. And then it was administered, I want to say, in 2019 as the last time prior to that.
With this being mandatory starting in 2025, do we get, and I think I know the answer to this because I didn't see it in the doc, but is there any funding that the state gives us in terms of setting up all this infrastructure and all of the instruction, et cetera, et cetera? Is this something that we're going to have to, I guess, just bake in going forward? And I guess, is there a big increase in cost that's associated with this?
I'll speak to that. No, we get no money really. And, but there's no increase. It's really a shift in the approach. However, I will say that when Dr. Freiberg came to speak, and she's retired from the state of Connecticut, it was a really great fee that she charged, right? It was a nominal fee that she charged to do the presentation. So there's no anticipation of additional costs. Years ago when people started saying you can't suspend kids out of school, that was a real concern, I would say more in the urban districts because you had to have substitutes, you had to have coverage, this and that, and more larger at scale. But and feel free anyone else to jump in, it's not going to be, I don't see any huge cost tied to any of these policies. I think that really it kind of provides us with the best practices. There's been a lot of talk about restorative practices, and this sort of puts its stamp on it legally that yes, this is the way to go. And there's a lot of misconceptions, I think, about what it looks like, what it means. I think people think it's in lieu of a consequence. It's really not. It's just kind of maybe framing a consequence a particular way, or having the accountability piece, working with the child, things like that. So I find it very exciting work. The last time the bullying policy was revised was October 2023, and there was some minor tweaks. This new draft, you should know, although it's by CABE, has Shipman all over it. Shipman worked with CABE because it's the most prominent law firm in the state to come up with this draft. And specifically about the surveys, there's a few little things that are going on with the surveys. You may see that we actually are doing a baseline survey this month, and it's a new survey tool. Dr. Henkel, I don't know if you want to share anything about that.
Yeah, Paige, within the definitions, they're around the school climate survey. Within this policy, they discuss a research-based, validated, and developmentally appropriate survey to students, employees, and families. This year, we're transitioning to a new tool. It's called Panorama, and it does align to the research-based and validated and developmentally appropriate aspect of survey questions. And we're going to be implementing it 2 times a year, once in the fall and once in the spring. And we're going to talk about that a little bit today at this curriculum committee meeting. But the window is opening for staff and students and parents in mid-September. And that data will be collected and utilized internally to help us drive some of our school climate goals. And some of the questions are very similar to what we have asked previously, but some of the language may be slightly changed. And, we are confident that this new tool is going to help us analyze the data differently and a little more seamlessly as well.
Along
Just
the
one
lines.
follow up, and then I'll let Sharon jump in. Just in terms of how we're measuring success for this, Tina, like what are the major metrics? I'm assuming we're doing these climate surveys. We're trying to get a sense of sort of, again, sentiment out there from parents and from students or whomever, and then we're obviously monitoring or tracking some sort of what the trend of disciplinary actions have been, I assume, throughout the schools, and then we can track that over time. How do we measure, how do we define success here? Is it just from year to year, people are feeling better, sentiment is improving, and the number of disciplinary actions is going down? Sort of help sort of just define the guardrails for me.
Yeah, sure. I think one piece that's important, and you already spoke about it, Michael, is that there's various data points that we're looking at when we're measuring success around school climate. Yes, one is around how people are connected to the school, whether it's a staff member, whether it's a student, whether it's a family. That is always been and will continue to be a focus of ours, of how can we better support families and feel connected to the school community and the experience in the buildings? How can students feel connected to their school? And how do we make sure that our staff feels valued and critical components of the work, right? Those are all pieces to the puzzle. And yes, that data comes in various points. And then the other piece is when we look at something like chronic absenteeism, which is measured in a different domain, so to speak, but we do track that data, and it is part of our accountability system that we report to the state. And we do look at that regularly, frequently. We look at tardies. We don't just look at absences. So when you're thinking about success and metrics, I think it's not one piece, it's a variety of pieces. And we take all of those into consideration when we're looking at success around school climate.
If I can add, one of the things that we were looking at specifically in the Connecticut School Climate Standards, and I said to the administrative staff, so we have all these standards, I have them on big slides, of the standards, and I'll say, where do you see yourself in that standard? What do you do? What do you do, Phil Cross? How do you relate to these standards? You know, he's in charge of the safety on the bus and all of that. Or how can you see what your work does to tie back? And the difference, one of the little differences this year that we really want to focus on, and we've talked a lot about it, is there's a very powerful statement in Standard 2, and it talks about intentionally re-engaging disengaged students, educators, and families. So I think that we do a lot of great things. You know, we have all kinds of programs, the PBIS program, the responsive classroom, the honeybees, and Horace down at the elementary, the different Connect programs, the PAC programs. We've really fine-tuned them this year, but looking through the lens of how we can re-engage the disengaged, I think is powerful. Because when you have someone that just is in a survey like, yeah, it's good, but you want them to be like, yeah, it's great, and this is what I'm involved in. And so, like, I know Julie in her new role has been looking at ways to how to engage the staff more in wellness initiatives, things like that. Julie, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about some of the things that you're thinking about. And that's kind of another metric, if you will.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. So I think we all know and we have acknowledged that teaching in particular is a very stressful profession. And in order for our educators to be able to bring their best each day to our students and to have the greatest impact in their work, they have to feel well and ready and in the right frame of mind. So it's a goal of mine to look at how we as a district are valuing our employees and how we are promoting their wellness, both through the benefits that we provide and also through programming and education. And it's linked very specifically to professional learning and our new evaluation plan, but it's also linked to various initiatives that we're looking at. An example of something that we're hoping to bring back this year is a flu shot clinic this fall for our staff members. So the more we engage our staff in thinking about and practicing good and healthy habits, then that trickles down to the student experience. And so if our staff feel connected, then our students can feel connected. So this work is really important to me and to us, and I think very critical to our success as we move forward.
And Julie, great to meet you. Welcome aboard. Just to follow up to that, and then sorry, Sharon, I'll kick it off to you. Sorry about that. I figure I'd just get all these questions out of the way. How are you measuring that? Like, aside from, is it participation? Is it just creating initiatives and events and meetings, etc., and then measuring participation? Is that simply how you're trying to sort of, let's say, re-engage or increase engagement amongst the various stakeholders? Are you quantifying that sort of, aside from just like saying, hey, we really want to re-engage the disengaged, is there any way of measuring that you're thinking about that can at some point then be reported to us, give us sort of a status as to how it's going, how effective we are in re-engaging these stakeholders?
Sure, and you make a great point. Participation is a ready point of data. So, as we roll out these opportunities and these programs, monitoring the rate of participation, asking for feedback from those participants. Are we getting at the things that they care about the most? Is there programming that we could offer that they would like to see and they would be more inclined to participate in? So I think that anecdotal feedback is important. I think certainly the quantified rates of participation is important. I think a variety of different activities is also important. So not just looking at the physical wellness perspective with a flu shot clinic, but also how are we looking at emotional wellness? How are we looking at financial wellness? How are we providing information about access to benefits and such? So to your question, I think there are a variety of data points. The most readily quantifiable would, of course, be participation. Yes.
All right, I have a couple questions here. First of all, Panorama, is this something that we've already been working with in the past, or is there any sort of additional cost that comes along with the utilization of the Panorama system for the school climate survey?
So the survey is new this year. We budgeted for it last year, kind of knowing and preparing that this was on the horizon. This will be the first year that we have administered the 3 surveys using the Panorama tool.
Okay. And so it's all budgeted, it's all covered.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, absolutely.
All right. That was the first
And
thing.
just one piece, just to add to the Panorama piece, I want to make sure that I'm clear in what I stated before. When we talk about staff and staff climate and staff well-being, we're not just talking about teachers. We're talking about all staff. We're talking about custodians. We're talking about paraeducators. We're talking about administrative assistants. We're talking about everyone that touches or interacts with students and adults. We want to gain their feedback, and we want to be able to offer opportunities for them to be connected with some of these initiatives that we have.
That's
Well,
fair.
like, it's a small thing, but when we did our Olympic kickoff, everybody got a T-shirt. The bus drivers came; they're not even paid that day. They came, but we said to the principals, "Find someone special to carry the flag." Like, we don't need to carry the flag. So like the security guard carried the flag at the intermediate school, you know, he was so happy to carry the flag. One of the middle school teachers was up on the press box with Patty, supporting her because he was a veteran, like trying to really make those connections. And, you know, yeah, we're all out and about, but to planfully make those connections. It's very easy at central office. You know, we're in our offices. We have to be out. Every one of us has to be out and engaging in conversation with people, because that's the way you find out, like, oh, they had some questions at the middle school about Howard School. And I said, well, to Dan DeVito, I go, can you send Uber over there to the counselors? No problem. They were so grateful. Wow, great. Thanks so much for sending him. It's these little kind of moments that you just, we have to make. To me, it's like the theme of this year for us is how to engage the disengaged, because we do so well at so many things, but how can we take it to the next level? How can we make sure that staff feel physically safe in the building? Yes, it's very safe, but is there anything we can tweak and revise to make it feel that much safer? Because, yeah, it's hard to be here with all the challenges that go on.
Yeah. Well, I agree. And I think obviously disengaged anyone is not a not a good participant in the system, right? Disengaged students, disengaged staff members, anyone. So I like the fact that you guys are focusing on bringing those who are disengaged back into the system. And you did a great job, by the way, too. The Olympic kickoff was,
Oh, you were there.
that was good. And it was easy to find the Board of Ed members. We didn't have T-shirts. So, hey.
Okay, no, you're getting one at the retreat, full disclosure.
I'll
Plus,
take
I
it.
have a read for you for the retreat. And that's another thing. We have these book groups going on in all the schools on the anxious generation. The high
Yes.
schools just run with it. You know, they're offering morning and afternoon sessions with what does that mean? It's a very powerful read.
That's, yeah, I saw
Yeah,
the
for you.
Megan's Week Ahead. I saw the Anxious Generation Book Club. I think that's fantastic. All right, so another thing, we in these in this new document, and this is looking at it with my policy cap. In this new document, the where they've redefined bullying, is this something that we need to address in future, or actually in past policies? Are we going to need to have a consistent definition of bullying? Do we continue with the definition that we have right now? Just out of curiosity, where did this definition of bullying, is this Shipman that came, this is where that came from, or okay. Are we going to need to change other policies to fall in line with this definition of bullying?
It's primarily this policy, and what we need to do is make sure all of the handbooks are aligned and everyone is clear about it. Like the, you know, presenting it at the faculty meetings, making sure it's clear in the handbook, talking to all the stakeholders about it. We have a special administrative retreat on a lot of this stuff, not a retreat, but a special leadership meeting at the end of September, where Jessica's actually going to come in to go through all of this. So, but policy, it's right here.
Okay. All right. And then the one of the other things I saw, and I read throughout the throughout the documents, was the reference to restorative justice. And we also talk about staff engagement. How do you see a link between staff engagement and restorative justice? And by that, I mean, I've heard some of examples of students acting disrespectfully towards staff members. And rather than the discipline being more of a, succinct, absolutely not, this is not going to be tolerated, there was more of a restorative justice approach taken. And in doing so, staff members, I think, feel a little like, what? Like disenfranchised, right? Like, hold on, they don't have my back when it comes to things like this. The students are allowed to act in a disrespectful manner and they're not being disciplined appropriately. And if I can talk to you about specifics later on, but I mean, is this something that you are, when we talk about restorative justice, is it something that is being looked at as a correlation between staff engagement and restorative justice?
I'll start and then someone else can jump in if you want. I think that, sometimes when you hear it's restorative practices, when you hear it, you think, the first impression might be, oh, so you're not going to suspend him and you're just going to have him do this. And I think that that's kind of unfair, because part of our job is also to educate that where it comes from. And so you have to look at, there has to be a consequence, and the consequence has to have a restorative component. And it looks different in every building level. I'll give you an example. There was a situation, and we've been moving slowly in that direction, but now it's in the policy to really speak to it and educate the staff about it and see. There was a situation at the middle school that involved some, I would say, mean-spirited behavior during recess. Not appropriate, everything else. And as in any kind of incident like this, we have logs that we keep and we record it. Some of it is for discipline. Some of it's just, I called and had a conversation with the parent. It had nothing to do with discipline, to kind of keep a record of, so people know like what's going on with this student. So in this particular situation, I worked with it with Dan Doak. We decided that, yes, you could suspend someone and say, okay, you're going to be suspended for this behavior. And it's going to be either an in-school suspension, most likely. We don't like to send out-of-school suspension. But instead, what we decided to do was for a week, the youngsters that were involved, there was several of them, came in at lunch. They had lunch in the library. And then we had different people come and speak to them about kind of the consequences of their actions, if you will. And that looked very different. I remember I spoke to them one day. Mr. Doak did, the counselor did, a social studies teacher did, because it was really to get them to understand the impact. And so that's an example of that. They learned more from that. And, writing an apology than just say, okay, go sit in the main office for a day. We'll separate you and the counselor will check in on work. So it's that kind of thing. There was a situation where someone had broken something that a student had made at the high school. And part of it was like, okay, this is what you have to do. You have to take this, you have to fix it, put it all back together or whatever. It was a piece of furniture, and bring it back to the school. That was a lot more meaningful than having them just sit in a room off of, the main office. So I think it's when people hear it, they don't, part of our struggle is, staff isn't really, in general, doesn't need to know the details of every single incident, because there's also privacy acts with kids. And so we don't make an announcement about what the discipline is. Actually, with restorative approach, they would be more involved in knowing that if they had to apologize to the teacher or make it right. Fifth graders throwing hand things all over the bathroom. I was there. This was before 2 years ago. I said, okay, let's go. They all came in, and here's Mr. Nick, the custodian, and you're going to go upstairs and you're going to clean this mess up with Mr. Nick. I mean, that's more powerful than just say, oh, you're not going to go out to recess, because they even had a conversation. They go, well, we weren't the only ones. And Mr. Nick said, oh, would you like to share who else did it? No, we'll just clean it up. But it's that kind of a thing. So I think I'm giving a long-winded answer, but it's also educating the staff and educating the students about, like, we want to change the behavior. We want them to understand why it's wrong, not just impose a punishment. Now, that being said, someone brings drugs into the school, someone does something like has a fight or something, there are consequences that include suspension for those things. But even with that, you can have a flavor, if you will, of a restorative practice. You've taken something away. How are you going to be accountable and help?
So it's not it's not a combination of restorative plus punishment, if you will, a consequence. It's in lieu of that you do the restorative justice.
It really depends, because suspending someone with the understanding they're going to fix this thing as part of the suspension is both. You know, there's no situation where if someone needs a disciplinary consequence, they need a disciplinary consequence. It just may look different within that framework.
Right. All right. Well, I guess, I mean, look, I don't disagree that restorative justice has its place. And, you know, the example that you gave of fifth graders in the bathroom, I think that that's a great thing for them to have to go in there and see exactly what goes into. You guys make a mess, you have to help clean it up. Like, I completely agree with that. I think that there's a lot to be learned from mistakes. And that's why, you know, you want your children to make mistakes at this stage of their lives so that they can learn. My fear is that I think, and I think I'm looking at this primarily from the upper level. I don't think I'm looking at it so much from the younger kids who are doing, you know, something inappropriate or naughty or whatever at school. I think I'm looking at it more from the high school level where the challenge is more of a mental challenge towards the teacher, and just making sure that the staff there doesn't feel, or making sure that the staff there still feels engaged, right?
Yeah.
And not sidelined by the restorative justice practice, making sure that they are on board with what the restorative justice is all about, and how it's, you know, not a disrespect to them that the child isn't, you know, the young adult is not being disciplined, but instead being given a restorative justice. If that makes sense. I guess I'm just, I don't know.
I hear what you're saying. I don't know, Julie, you were, you know, there last year. I don't know if you would like to, because we've been slowly moving in this direction. If you'd like to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that restorative practices is not about how we handle issues where students are misbehaving. Restorative practices is about how we build communities where adults and students feel connected to part of a whole, and where they ascribe to a set of norms that they own. And in doing that, the idea is that when misbehaviors happen, that they are more easily and readily corrected in ways that students can learn from, and that they can see the impact. Lisa's point is well taken. It's about connecting students and adults so that when those misbehaviors happen, they can be more readily addressed in ways that continue to develop the relationships and the communities that are built through restorative practices. So restorative justice is a little bit of a tricky term to use. So in those situations where misbehaviors occur, absolutely, under a restorative practices mind frame, there have to be consequences. And there are times when those consequences, with typical school disciplinary consequences, which would be removal, detention, suspension, expulsion, there is not an opportunity for students to learn from and correct their behavior in relation to that impact on the other students or the teacher. So it's not to say, as Lisa explained, that those things won't happen. Detentions and suspensions and expulsions have a place in school communities, but to also consider how a restorative conversation or consequences that promote accountability and understanding of impact can be more impactful in the long term in preventing repeated misbehaviors or continued issues of, bad behavior, as Lisa called it, I think. So it's hard. There's sort of a misnomer here when we talk about restorative practices that we equate that with restorative justice, and it's not necessarily the same thing. But Sharon, your point is well taken. We have to make sure that, the school building is continuing to function and that things are efficient and that teachers feel supported in the work that they're doing. So it's an ongoing situation where training needs to be had by our adults so that they understand how to cultivate restorative practices in the classroom, and also by our administrators as they're working with students when those misbehaviors do occur.
And part of, excuse me, one last question, and this is part of the policy addresses repeat offenders, right? So restorative justice is the concept of it. Again, I'm not disagreeing with the concept of the restorative practices and restorative justice, but just to make sure that they are actually learning from it. And if we see repeated behaviors, then I'm assuming the result will be different as far as the discipline is concerned. Because we also have to teach these kids, especially again, upper schools. There is no restorative justice when you
leave. Yeah. No, that's why the log is important. We always do a progressive disciplinary approach.
Okay.
That's where kind of in old school, it would be, okay, you're suspended for 2 days. Gee, now you've done it again. Usually it's like you say after school, you have 2 hours after school, but during those 2 hours, maybe you're doing something different than just sitting there. You're suspended, then, it progresses. And that's why it says, if you've been suspended a certain amount of days, then there's clearly a problem.
Okay. All right. I just, again, and coming from the teacher's perspective, let's make them feel supported. I don't want them to feel disrespected and as if nothing's going to happen to these kids. They're just going to have to sit down and write, sorry, make sure that
it's a lot more than that.
Yeah. No, good. Okay. I'm done. Steve?
No, we can move on from this.
Okay.
The next one, I believe, that was this one. Now we're into the non-discrimination. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
The non-discrimination for students and the regulations. Again, this is in the 5,000 series, and these are we're going to be working with Jessica on this simultaneously towards the end of the month. It refers to Title IX. I don't know if any of my colleagues wish to comment, but it's another one that we need to.
I can just contribute that Title IX is another policy that's undergone extensive revision within a very short time frame. I think the last policy revision was only a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
This makes some pretty significant changes also around definitions, and it also potentially changes the investigation process that was delineated and outlined in a very specific way in the previous policy. This kind of calls for a modification of that approach.
Is that language excuse me? Is that language, do we just adopt that language as boilerplate language from the state? Is that how that occurs? Does that get handed down to us and basically there's no flexibility there? We just accept as is? I'm just trying to understand sort of the discussion here. There's been a lot of, to your point, Tracy, I think there's been a lot of back and forth at the federal level, right? That impacts the states with respect to definitions of Title IX. And I think that there are some states where the new definition is now sort of in flux, and other states maybe where the new definition took hold. I'm not an expert, but is this something that the feds hand down to the states, and then if the state adopts it, the state just hands it down to our district and we just approve it? Is there anything here for us to weigh in on, or are we just being notified of the changes?
So the definition changes are given to us. We don't have any flexibility with regard to that. There is some flexibility in this new policy about the manner in which roles within the investigation are defined, and that's spelled out here. But no, we don't get to choose which definition we're operating under or how that's going to look.
But there is, I guess, we do have some discretion as to the investigative proceedings. Is that what it is, to any sort of violation? Is that right? Or does that all get handed down as well?
So in the previous policy, there were very specific roles assigned. So there was a decision maker, an investigator. I won't get too much into the weeds on that. In this particular policy, we have some leeway as to and we had leeway then, to be clear, like we decided who the decision makers were, who the investigators were within the district. From my perspective, and other people can weigh in, this approach is potentially a little bit less siloed than the previous policy dictated. But the overall structure of this policy is not we get to pick and choose. It's just how we're following up and investigating on incidents that fall within the realm of this policy.
Okay, thanks. Just trying to understand what sort of our impact here it is, but it
Yeah, I
sounds
think it's a little bit on process, Michael, and that's why it's so important that Jessica's spending the time with the leadership team, because she is going specifically, most of the focus is going to be particularly on this policy and how to make sure that we do the investigations. We're fortunate in that when the state, is legislators saying, okay, this is what you have to follow, that Chipman and the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, CABE, have a real close relationship. And so they work on the actual model policies for us. And then the key is, how are they enforced? So sort of our plan with these two, because it's kind of a lot, but then we have to do it, is to make people aware of it, both at the retreat and and then to bring it formally to the board for a first reading, probably October, November, and then vote on it by then. And as we're all learning about where the rubber meets the road in the investigations and everything, at the end of September, our team will have a much more solid understanding of how it impacts the daily lives of the building administrators when they face with this.
Do we have any other questions on that one? Steve, anything? Neither. I saw a lot of spaces in there, obviously, to be filled in with individuals, but that changes, I'm assuming, on an annual basis, or with who's going to be responsible for reporting to and et cetera. We need to fill all that in, obviously, but this is, yeah. All right.
Exactly. So I think that, I think touching on this at the retreat, bringing it formally October and November is the way to go for the two reads at the board level, because there is a lot, and I don't even want to attempt the first read at the first meeting. I think people need to kind of go through it with Jessica at the retreat, and then it takes time to kind of digest it all, with the goal of approving this no later than the December meeting, hopefully November.
Okay.
A good 6 months before. And meanwhile, our work and our approach with these things is how we're operating. Does that make sense?
It does.
Comfortable with that?
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. All right. So moving on, discussion of policies, regulations, and bylaws in future meetings. It sounds like we're going to have some, after the retreat, are we going to have more work to do on this? Or this is, again, just getting the rest of the board on board?
I think the rest of the board on board, and to have them, it's going to take time to really go through and kind of, I want to make sure that everybody's questions are answered and everything, because yes, we have to comply with these changes, but it's important that it goes beyond compliance. We also have to have an understanding of what it means and feel comfortable with that. So,
but we don't really have any latitude. If we don't feel comfortable with it, it's a state mandate, right?
But then, it's our job to figure out how to make people feel comfortable with it, and
All
to
right.
make sure everyone's questions are answered and people have a clear understanding. So I think we'll take our time with this. The good thing is we have the time, and we've already put things in place. Like, we wanted to change the survey even before any of this, the panorama survey. We've been talking about that a year and a half ago. So it's good that one thing I'm very proud of is our team collectively is very proactive in looking at, how to make sure that not only are we in compliance, but we're doing what's best for the district.
Okay. All right. Excellent.
One of the other policies that we're going to be bringing forward, just so you know, and I can let Dr. Henkel talk a little bit about that. We're hoping maybe January, February. Again, we have time, but we had a meeting yesterday about it, is the wellness policy that hasn't been updated in 20 years. Is that correct?
2006.
Huh?
Oh, a
Almost.
little less. So you want to give a flavor of that?
Yeah, I think the state has been supporting districts around creating a wellness policy that is representative of the whole child, right? This is a student policy. It lives within the series 5,000. And we've been looking at some sample plans and policies that are already in existence that really encompass the whole, similar to what Julie was talking about, how we reconnect and re-engage students and give opportunities for them to feel like they are supported. And how do we do that? What are our action steps that relate to some of the curriculum, relate to the events, and relate to ways that we're reconnecting kids to feeling supported and well in their district, in their school. So that's forthcoming. We're going to have a subcommittee that's going to be working on a revised and updated policy that will come and present to you. And then from that policy, we want to think about some of the action steps that will be integrated into a district whole child wellness plan that relate to all the aspects of curriculum, events, experiences that also relate to some of the standards that Lisa was talking about before that are related to making stronger connections between staff and students, and all aspects related to student wellness and how they feel connected to their school.
Like for example, one of the things we noticed in our old policy, that's how old it is it talks about, where do we talk about nutrition? And we talk about it in health now. Like it references family and consumer sciences. That program doesn't even exist anymore at the middle school. So it's kind of, it's just really fine tuning and cleaning some of those things up. And one of the things is to reinvigorate the Wellness Advisory Council, which we, haven't been probably as active. They're supposed to meet a few times a year. Andre Santelli, we've kind of done a renewed, a renewal of our Chartwell's contract has brought on some other positive things within that, that kind of align with wellness. So I think it's all good, but I know that that's a policy that we, that's definitely on the radar.
Can I ask a question on that? Who sets the nutrition aspects of what we serve in the cafeterias?
Andre. So that's
But is that based on what?
Well, I can certainly invite him when we do the policy review to talk about it, but I know that he bases everything, quite frankly, on good health. That was the whole reason we also went off the federal lunch program, because we wanted to have more of the flexibility, and we're not alone in this, to make sure that we are offering really good healthy. They have rules too about like how much fat they serve, or the good fat, trans fat, all of that stuff. He knows his stuff. I mean, you go there and it's always these great fresh offerings that they're able to make. And now, we had some trouble with staff, and I think we're at 22 now. We need 24 minimum. When we have a full staff working, then that can also open up our options of what they can prepare.
So Chartwell's still a little short.
We're a little short, but you know what? We've done a great job, and I appreciate Julie's help in linking the application to our HR website. They just hired, I know, a manager at the high school, which is a big deal. People came in. It's a challenge because, they're interviewing people, and people come in and they had 6 interviews one day, and 3 people didn't even show up for the interview. Like, it's like, where are they, but we've made some headway there, which is great to see.
Good. All right. So it sounds as if we've got some plans moving forward. I'm looking forward to discussing this a little bit more robustly, I guess, what we're talking about today with the entire board. And so that should be good. Are there any other things that future policies, et cetera, anybody wants to bring up that we can address moving forward? If not, then our next meeting is scheduled for October 1st. And I think if, unless anybody has anything else to add, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
Can I just bring up one, I'm sorry, just one question. When we send out a survey, regardless of what the survey is, what's the determinant that we are getting a successful response, that you can actually draw conclusions from it?
Tina?
There is an actual percentage that validates whether or not the data is predictive of your population based on your enrollment and your size. I don't have that percentage of return on surveys, but we did include it in our training with our principals. So hopefully after we get that number, we're going to review that data. I will say that this year we as a district have been really trying to think about how to increase those responses from families especially, and market it differently and communicate more intensely. And then also we're expanding the time frame this year that is a little different than in the past. And you may already see some weekly newsletters and information from the principals that are going out to families. And then also Tracy will be sending out a community informational letter when the survey goes live also. So we're trying to be proactive this year to increase that number this year.
And do we engage the PTOs as well?
Yes. I don't know if Lisa, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, I meet with the presidents of the PTOs, and we encourage them to please blast it out to get the response. I remember years ago from my statistics days, you definitely have to have more than 25% people respond. Our goal this last time in the spring, we didn't get as much of a response rate. Now that also could mean because people think things are good, who knows? But we're doing a concerted effort with this new survey because we do kind of want the baseline and then the end of the year to get people to please take the survey. So the link will appear in numerous venues.
Great, thank you.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you.
And I need to have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn?
Second?
Second.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I will see you at the retreat or on the 1st of October.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Gifts.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone.
Oops. We have a Board of Ed meeting before that, too. Sorry, September 16th. Bye, guys.
Bye.